The United Nations Assembly buzzed with tension. Cameras zoomed in as leaders from across the world took their seats. President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso sat calmly, flanked by his aides. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approached the podium, expression unreadable. Silence blanketed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Netanyahu began, voice steady, "today I speak not only as a leader, but as a human being." Whispers rippled through the audience. No one expected what came next. "To President Ibrahim Traore, I owe an apology." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Traore's eyes narrowed, unmoved. "Our past actions have sown mistrust," Netanyahu continued. "But if peace means anything, it begins with truth." The cameras cut to Traoré, stone-faced, unreadable. Journalists leaned forward in their chairs. "For overlooking African voices, for neglecting justice, I'm sorry." Flashbulbs popped. The room froze. Traoré slowly rose from his seat. The world held its breath. Without a word, Traoré turned his back. He walked, head high, stride calm. Whispers turned to stunned silence. Diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Netanyahu paused, visibly shaken. "Mr. President," he began again. Traoré did not stop. One aide followed, another hesitated. Traoré raised one hand. The aide stopped. The walkout was deliberate, symbolic. News feeds exploded. Traoré walks out. Social media erupted with hashtags. "You respect Africa?" Or "Your apology rejected?" Or "Traoré truth." Netanyahu resumed speaking, voice slightly hoarse. "Perhaps I was too late," he said, "but late is better than never." The room remained divided. Some clapped, some frowned. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's walkout played on every screen. Street vendors stopped to watch. University students applauded. His cabinet received texts. Legend. Within an hour, his approval ratings spiked. A crowd formed outside the presidential palace. Back at the UN, Netanyahu returned to his seat. His aides whispered furiously. A top Israeli diplomat buried his face in his hands. A BBC reporter murmured, "History was just made." French journalists called it a turning point. African delegations whispered among themselves. The mood was shifting. Traoré had left the building, but his presence loomed larger than ever. That night, news anchors asked, was this the start of something new? Was it performative or a long-awaited reckoning? People had opinions, but no one had answers. Not yet. In Tel Aviv, protests broke out. "Whose side are we on?" signs read. Some praised Netanyahu's courage. Others called it betrayal. In Burkina Faso, drums echoed in the capital. "Our president speaks without speaking," said a young activist. Meanwhile, Traoré released a statement. "Apologies without accountability are performance. Justice demands action, not optics. We will not be props." His words went viral. African leaders from Mali, Guinea, and Niger issued similar sentiments. A joint West African declaration was drafted overnight. I called for equity, respect, and a seat at the global table. The African Union backed it unanimously. Meanwhile, U.S. media debated, was Netanyahu cornered into that moment? Was Traoré's walkout disrespectful or powerful? On college campuses, debates raged. TikTok influencers broke it down in 15-second clips. On the third day, Netanyahu addressed his nation. "We tried," he walked away. But his tone lacked the resolve of his earlier apology. His coalition partners squabbled behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Traoré returned home to a hero's welcome. Tens of thousands flooded Ouagadougou streets. They waved signs. "Africa stands tall." Children wore paper crowns. "Le Président du Peuple." Civil society groups praised his leadership. West African media dubbed him the Lion of Diplomacy. Netanyahu's advisors reached out for a private meeting. Traoré declined. Not until policy matches words. On day 5, the UN convened an emergency session. African states introduced a resolution on global respect and restitution. It passed the General Assembly by a historic margin. The only no votes, Israel and a few allies. Western diplomats were caught off guard. The tide had turned. Young African diplomats began getting international coverage. Ivy League universities offered full scholarships to students from the Sahel. African think tanks saw surging support. Burkina Faso launched the Traoré Fellowship for Pan-African Studies. International arms deals to African countries were paused for review. Public discourse shifted. Even late-night comedians began referencing Traoré. This guy walked out of the UN like he owned the building. The story inspired a Netflix documentary, The Walkout, Traoré's Silence. NGOs called it a diplomatic masterstroke. Others said it set a dangerous precedent. The world was not prepared. The cameras were rolling. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sat solemnly. Across from him on a massive split screen was Ibrahim Traore, leader of Burkina Faso. It was a surprise broadcast announced just minutes before. No press briefings, no leaks, just one cryptic announcement. A historic apology is coming. The internet exploded with speculation. Was it about Palestine, Africa, weapons deals, climate damage? As millions tuned in, the room fell silent. Netanyahu leaned forward. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes looked tired, but sincere. President Traoré, he began, I come to you today not as a political rival, but as a human being. The world watched in disbelief. Traoré raised his eyebrows. Netanyahu continued, in the past decade, actions have been taken, covert, unethical, and harmful to your people. A collective gasp rippled across the globe. We interfered in Burkina Faso's affairs. We supplied intelligence. That led to internal strife. We pursued strategic control, not peace. And for that, I am sorry. Silence. A pause. Netanyahu looked down. Traoré sat still, unmoving, unblinking. Then he spoke. Why now? Netanyahu exhaled. Because we can no longer deny the past. And because healing must start somewhere. There was tension in Traoré's voice. You undermined our sovereignty. Our people paid in blood. You destabilized our borders. Netanyahu nodded. Yes, and no apology can erase that. But perhaps it can begin to acknowledge it. The world was still holding its breath. Traoré looked off screen, then back. Words are not enough. What do you offer? Netanyahu turned to his aides. A folder was passed. A full declassification of all Israeli activity in West Africa. Compensation to affected families. Technology to rebuild what was lost. And diplomatic equality. Shock. Commentators lost their minds. News anchors fumbled for words. Traoré remained composed. You mean to say, Israel will publicly confess its covert operations in Africa? Netanyahu. Yes. It is time the world knew. We were wrong. At that moment, the hashtag global apology began trending worldwide. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered around outdoor TVs. Many cried. Many cheered. In Tel Aviv, protests turned into vigils. Young Israelis held signs. We choose truth. Back on screen, Traoré looked thoughtful. This is unprecedented. But how can we trust this is real? Netanyahu gestured. A document flashed on the screen. It was a signed executive order. Traoré's name was listed as a witness. We've begun the process today. No delay. No secrets. Reporters erupted with questions. None were answered. Netanyahu and Traoré were locked in dialogue. This could change everything, Traoré said. Netanyahu smiled faintly. That is the point. We've operated in shadows too long. It's time for light. A sudden interruption. The screen flickered. A third figure appeared. United Nations Secretary-General Alara Singh. We've been monitoring this broadcast. We are ready to initiate a Truth and Justice Council, jointly led by African and Israeli representatives. This was getting bigger by the second. Effective immediately, Singh added, and recognized by the United Nations. Traoré looked stunned. Netanyahu appeared relieved. Finally, he whispered. Finally. The world began to react. African Union leaders convened an emergency summit. France released a cautious statement. China offered to support regional reconciliation. Russia issued silence. The US called it a promising step. Netanyahu and Traoré continued for hours. The broadcast remained live. There were tears, there were jokes, there was history being rewritten in real time. Meanwhile, whistleblowers emerged. Former Mossad agents offered testimony. Files began leaking from Niger, from Ghana, from Sudan. An entire web of interference was being revealed. But with each revelation came another apology, another vow to make it right. Israeli citizens organized reparations fundraisers. Burkina Faso's parliament passed a day of truth. Schools in both countries began teaching this history. A new alliance was formed, the Reconciliation Bloc. Israel, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Rwanda, and more were joining. On social media, a new hashtag emerged. When leaders lead. The apology had sparked something deeper. Real diplomacy, real change, real courage. But not everyone was happy. Shadowy forces resisted. A cyber attack hit the UN website. Disinformation campaigns began. Netanyahu's party split in dissent. Traoré received threats. But neither leader backed down. They doubled security and tripled transparency. They launched the Truth Stream, a 24/7 channel of live governmental accountability. Youth ambassadors were appointed. Artists painted murals in Tel Aviv and Ouagadougou.